Not only we want to guarantee reliable, predictable, acoustical excellency in our systems through the use of our loudspeakers, amplifiers, DSP and software tools, but we also want to make sure that the intended audio program, the mix, is always focused only on the audience and try to avoid as much as possible sending acoustical energy to neighbors outdoors in festivals or to side or rear walls indoors. In 2018, the bottom limit of directivity control for large format line array systems like the J series, for example, was around 250 Hertz. It was only subwoofers that could deliver a cardioid directivity pattern for the very low frequencies. By cardioid pattern, as most of you know, we mean that we are projecting the energy towards the audience, having some attenuation to the sides and creating a noticeable cancellation towards the rear. Again, keeping the energy where we are pointing the system. And then SL series came along. SL series was the first family of line arrays that offered broadband directivity control with low frequency cardioid behavior. And this incredible technical achievement, which was a giant leap forward for the industry, was achieved, and this is important to remember for later, in a three-way, two-channel active system. In the last 7 years, the SL series has become an industry standard, and you will always find SL series in the most important concert tours around the world and in the most prestigious large installation venues. So the industry demand for that broadband directivity control with low frequency cardio behavior feature is real and it's very intense. This has put us in an interesting position. We are under a lot of pressure to deliver that same feature to smaller venues, to smaller applications below those that today are catered by XSL. What do these applications have in common and who operates them? We are talking about companies that have smaller warehouses, smaller trucks, smaller vans, smaller crews to move things around and take care of the show, and most of the times, smaller budgets as well. And they operate in smaller venues that have less space to move around. They operate with smaller productions, with smaller shows, with less time, with less people to work on them. So let's think, what does the ideal compact line array, the type of line array that sits below XSL and that today we have the T10 and the Y series, what are the ideal features to cater to this type of companies and productions? Well, we know it needs to be very compact and light so that it's easy to move in and out of the shows and in and out of its trucks. We know it needs to be passive because we must save money and weight in cabling infrastructure, and we must save in amplifier channel count. And finally, we still have to figure out how to make it passive so that we can bring the broadband directivity control with low frequency cardioid behavior feature of the SLs to these applications. But we just said that SL series are large boxes, three-way and two-channel active. So how did that happen? To explain how that works, we have Janko with us today.
Thank you, Santi. So let's take a look. Let's do like 4.5 minutes of audio nerdery. I promise it won't be much longer. Let's take a look inside a CCL cabinet. Hopefully a view that you normally would not have to take. Hopefully nobody takes a saw and cuts your boxes in half. And there is actually two really interesting electroacoustic things to look at in there. You could summarize them under efficiency and fidelity, and I'll show you why. Let's start with the obvious. We were mentioning the cardioid low frequency behavior, which is what gives us full bandwidth directivity control. So that's obviously the thing that everybody craves. And to understand how that works in here, let's very quickly revisit what is physically necessary to make something cardioid, something that we must have. So we must physically have two sources, and they must be spaced a certain distance apart that relates to the frequency range where this thing is supposed to work in. We have two sources in the CCL. We have a 7-inch driver in the front, and we have a 5-inch driver inside, you could say, in the rear of the cabinet. And they have an appropriate spacing. This is what we must provide physically. What we also must provide is a specific processing for the rear driver relative to the front driver. And this processing is to provide a certain amount of frequency-dependent delay, which then in combination with the spacing causes cancellation to the rear and addition to the front. This is something we normally do electronically. If we have two DSP channels available, then we can process the hell out of the two passbands. But we can't do that here. It's a passive box. It's just one channel of amplification, one channel of DSP, so there's no way how to electronically process one thing against the other. So we have to do it differently here, passively, or you could also say natively within the box. We have to solve this issue by how the box is designed, by the electroacoustic design of the cabinet. And for this, we use resonators. Sounds like a weird word. If you're not so familiar with this term, think about it in terms of bass reflex chambers, bandpass chambers. I'm sure you've heard these terms, and that's exactly what resonators are. It's a different word for the same thing. Why is this such an important item? Well, resonators have a couple of acoustic features, but the one that we're after here is that they produce frequency-dependent delay. We've heard that one before, like 30 seconds ago. So we have a physical means of producing frequency-dependent delay, and those physical means are here behind the front driver, and here two more in front of and behind the rear driver. Now, if we manage to tune the frequency ranges in which those resonators work, and if you manage to place the ports of them appropriately, then we can generate pretty much exactly the same processing in the box natively that you would normally have had to do electronically. I would call this quite an efficiency boost. And if you do it right, then this is what the ISO bars look like. This is the ISO bar for CCL8, and you can see we get broadband directivity control all the way down. If you compare that to any one of the two-way active process systems, this will look suspiciously similar. So that's the obvious bit. That's the thing everybody talks about, done in a very efficient way. But that's not all. The low end is only half the story, and to understand the rest of the story, we need to take a look at the output capability and how this develops in the line array in general. It's nothing specific to this system, but it's just as true. So, simplifying, in a line array, all the low frequency drivers pretty much add up for everybody in the audience. That means the more cabinets you add to a line array, the more total output capability you have. Develops something like that. It's a schematic display here, just so you get the idea. But this is only true for the lows. The higher you go in frequency when looking at a line array cabinet, the more directional it becomes. It's called proportional directivity. And that means adding loudspeakers to gain more output capability doesn't really work for the high frequencies. Because if something is very directional and I need more high frequency output capability in this direction where the far end of the audience is, having a loudspeaker pointed that way won't really help me. Yeah? So it only adds a tiny amount to neighboring cabinet, maybe a little bit, but essentially every cabinet is fighting for itself. And that means I need to have all the HF output capability in that one cabinet that's pointed in the intended direction, aka the output capability of a single cabinet is determining the performance envelope in terms of how much distance I can cover, how far I can transport the fidelity, the HF extension. This is governed by the capability of that single high frequency section. So I must strive to have in every cabinet the most potent high frequency section I can come up with for that size. And this is exactly why our engineering guys and the engineering guys of our driver supply got together. The story goes that it has to do something with wine. They're Italian. But sometimes they also come back with something that's actually, a tangible thing that you can build, that you can put into a cabinet. And yeah, I've heard those stories, yeah. And they came up with this thing here. This is a new, very compact, proprietary high-frequency driver. It's got a 1.75-inch diaphragm. It is really, really super efficient. So for this size, it goes incredibly loud. It also has really low distortion. And 2 of them are fitted to every CCL cabinet. So this gives us the headroom in the high frequencies where we need it to bridge long distances, because if you have a large array, it usually means the last row of the audience is much farther away than if you have a small one. And this means we need to push the high frequencies up in level to overcome air absorption, maybe even really dry air. And here today it's just 30% or so humidity, so it's really dry. And this is where you need this headroom. So we have the efficiency of having a passive cabinet. We have the efficiency of a really excellent high frequency driver, and this allows us to transport the fidelity, even under difficult conditions, to the back of the audience. So far for the mid-high cabinet, but there's one more member in the family. You've seen them down here probably, the CCL-SUB, the system subwoofer. From the outside it's a rectangular box, not all that exciting. It becomes more interesting once you know it's also cardioid, and it becomes even more interesting once you know this is passively cardioid. So it also only requires 1 amplifier channel to work. And you might have guessed we're using the same basic principle that we're using in the top cabinet here as well. So if you take a look inside, we see again we have the physical necessities. We have 2 sources, a 15-inch driver in the front, a 10-inch driver in the back. They're also fitted with the appropriately tuned resonators. This is the front one, and these are the 2 rear ones. And the ports of those resonators are placed appropriately so that in total we get natively from the box a cardioid dispersion. So far for the nerdy look inside, but I think there's a couple more items that we want to look at on the outside, or that comes as a tangible thing of the system.
Indeed. Santi, thank you so much, Janko. Bear with us a couple of points before we go into the listening session. First of all, what about rigging configuration possibilities for CCL? Best news, no surprises. The CCL incorporates the well-known industry standard 3-point rigging system from D&B. We have gotten very clever and creative with some of the new elements for the rigging accessories, as you will see very soon. But you can count with all the traditional configurations that you would expect from a new line array system from D&B. We have tops only and mixed arrays. We have a couple of new clever ways of doing pullback configurations, and another set of possibilities for ground stack on frames or subs. Our motto is, if you can rig a D&B system, you can rig CCL, which means no additional training necessary, no anything new to learn. We follow the standard D&B workflow for the CCL. So you can start working the very next day you receive your CCL. Before you ask, yes, there is a new transport card for the CCL. It's an aluminum, very compact, very light card that travels with 4 units straight and has a hard lid that will take 70 kilos of cables, accessories, amplifiers. It also features a protective skirt so that your CCLs are protected in and out of the track, and travels with the selected flying frame in the rear of the boxes, which saves a lot of space, together with the chains that you can accommodate below the card. All in all, a very convenient, practical solution. Now, electronics. D40, 40D, and of course D80 and D90 can power CCL and CCL-SUB up to 8 units per amplifier with no headroom restriction under any load. 20D, D20 and 30D will in certain circumstances have a slight headroom reduction depending on the specific configuration. But a very cool takeaway from the efficiency of the, in this case, 40D and CCL, is that a system like the one we're going to be listening today could be powered by only 3 amplifiers. In fact, today you would have 1 amplifier to spare. And finally, the moment that we've all been waiting for. Let's listen to the CCL. But some of you may know that when DNB introduces a cardioid system, the listening experience begins from behind the system. Therefore, we want to ask you to join us up on stage and walk behind these 2 ground stacks so that you can experience the rear ejection of the CCL. Come join us on stage.